of the future. They're trying to bring back from the brink their global governance. And they were having this meeting on Sunday morning. We're still learning more about it, but it's just they don't want to let go of these initiatives to try and have total control over our lives, including pumping up another global health emergency. Well, the best person to talk to about this is Reggie Littlejohn. I've had her on before. She's a graduate of Yale Law School who has worked as a litigation attorney for 8 years. She's an expert on globally complex issues, founder and president of Anti-Globalist International, an organization dedicated to resisting the Great Reset, the global takeover advanced by the World Health Organization and other globalist organizations. She's also the president of Women's Rights Without Frontiers. So, Reggie, thank you so much for coming on with me again. This is so sudden. So I know you're... They snuck it in on a Sunday morning, so I know you're still kind of going through what they discussed about this pact, but let us know what you found out so far.
Okay, so this is the thing, Christy, it's as everybody was so concentrated, like the entire freedom movement was concentrated on opposing the World Health Organization power grab through the new pandemic treaty and the international health regulation amendments. And then we've been distracted also by the elections and all the incredible drama that's going on there. The United Nations has been slipping through under something they call the silence procedure, this pact for the future. And it's gone through 4 revisions, and they finally passed it on yesterday morning, Sunday morning. And it's a horrible thing. I believe this is going to be catastrophic for humanity. So one of the things that is really central to this is this idea that the United Nations has to be the central authority guiding nations or even mandating things to nations regarding how to handle complex global shocks. And so it has in there about complex global shocks and how that we need a whole society, whole government control, and that the United Nations is in the central role. They don't give any details. And this is the thing about all of these documents, is that they are very short on details. If you want to find out the details, though, you can in this thing called Policy Brief number 2 about complex global shocks. And first of all, I want to just read something to make sure I get the language right. This is important enough to actually read it, okay? In this policy brief, the Secretary General of the United Nations says, I, the Secretary General, propose that the General Assembly of the United Nations provide the Secretary General and the United Nations system with standing authority to convene and operationalize automatically an emergency platform in the event of future complex global shocks of sufficient scale, severity, and reach. So they want a platform that they want standing authority to operationalize automatically this platform in response to complex global shocks. What does that mean? It means the Secretary General gets to decide when there's a complex global shock, and then he gets to, and then the nations don't have any further say in it because it's going to operationalize automatically whatever protocol they set in place of how we must handle this. So this is a direct attack on sovereignty of the United States and all the countries in the world. It makes it a treaty. They call it a pact, but it's really a treaty. And I think the reason they call it a pact is because they want to avoid the treaty process. For example, having to get it passed through the United States Senate. And nobody knows about this because it was passed through the silence procedure. So this is, in my opinion, is really a catastrophic event.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's ridiculous because it's like, how can you have a treaty or a pact or whatever without more than one party saying it's so ridiculous. I guess like the silver lining of it is that it shows how desperate they are because, you know, they did face so much resistance when they tried to push that WHO pandemic treaty on us. And because of that, now they're trying to bypass the sovereignty. But all I can think of as you're speaking, Reggie, is every dystopian movie I've seen where, you know, this elite group of people tries to come in and take over the sovereignty of we the people. Ultimately, I mean, think of like the Hunger Games, think of Divergent, like think of all of that, those themes. And so we need to spread the word because it's like we are now in a dystopian movie where people want to take over our freedoms and want to just without no holds bar direct what we have to do, right? And so on a more personal level, what do you think they ultimately want to do with these powers?
Okay, well, let's talk about the powers to begin with. Excuse me. So let's talk about the powers to begin with. There's a chart that's in this policy brief number 2 about what constitutes a complex global shock. And so there's a number of categories which include climate change, right? So a pandemic, the grid going down, the internet going down, the financial system going down, a major event in outer space. So they claim not only authority over the world but over the universe, and then something that they've called black swan event, which is basically anything that they have not thought of. All right. So in any of these basically any aspect of life on Earth and in outer space, they can declare a complex global shock, and then they will operationalize automatically this emergency platform. And so you ask me, where do I think they're heading with this? I think that the United Nations and the World Health Organization, which is the medical arm of the United Nations, want to establish a totalitarian, biotech, digital, technocratic gulag for the world to live in. And these are the documents that would give rise to that.
Yeah, and I was talking about how, we already know they want to control our food, what we eat, access to what we eat, access to freely travel, that they want to make it so that any health treatment or vaccines are mandatory. So, this is a huge deal that we can't let slip through the cracks. But it's interesting from the little bit that I've been able to read about this meeting that the Secretary General was essentially lamenting that under Trump, they had funding removed. And then thankfully, Biden came in and was able to reestablish that funding. But it does seem like this is all desperation. And they see the writing on the wall that if Trump is able to return to becoming president, that they'll lose funding, they'll lose some of their abilities to push these things through. RFK Jr. did do a post on X basically saying we all need to reach out to the UN ambassador. To me, it just seems like, well, what good is that going to do, honestly? But at least they are resisting this. What are your thoughts on this happening along with the election so near?
I think it's deliberate. I think that they are trying to push this through before the election because they want Joe Biden to sign it into law through executive order, which he should not do because I believe this is a treaty. And, people say, well, the Constitution will protect us. Actually, what's really important is who is in office. Because if, for example, President Trump is reelected, he'll just tell them he won't comply. He already withdrew us once from the WHO. I have no doubt he would do it again. He said he would. And since that time, we've been seeing the pernicious nature of the United Nations as well. So if you have an executive branch that will stand up for our constitutional rights, then they won't be able to effectuate this in the United States. But if you don't, so the Biden-Harris administration has been pushing this stuff, especially in terms of the World Health Organization on the international health regulations. They were the ones who initiated the whole process and got the ball rolling on it. They're not going to resist. I believe that they are globalists and they're going to push it through. So, people can't say the Constitution will protect us. The Constitution is a treasure that was given to us by our forefathers. And it is, I like to use the analogy that it's like a beautiful sword that is meant to defend us. But if you sit there and you put it on your wall and you say, boy, isn't that beautiful? I'm so glad it's going to defend me. It's not going to defend you. You have to learn how to use it, and you need to actually use it for you to defend yourself. It's not going to defend us. It's a tool we need to use to defend ourselves. So in terms of sending an email to the ambassador to the United Nations, I don't think that's a bad idea. I think it's a fine idea, but it's not enough. Okay. What needs to happen is we need to be sending emails to our own congressional representatives. And that's what we did in terms of the World Health Organization, where we said, these international health regulations are actually a treaty. They need to be, can only become effective in the United States with the advice and the consent of the Senate. We had hundreds of thousands of actions of people sending emails and calling their representatives. And sure enough, a couple of weeks ago, Bill 1425 passed the U.S. House of Representatives, saying that no treaties or other agreements coming out of the World Health Organization will be complied with in the United States without the advice and consent of the Senate. We did that. The listeners did that. So this is what we got to do. We got to send emails to our representatives. And I would ask everybody to go on to antiglobalist.net, which is the home of Anti-Globalist International. And to the right, there's a little button that says take action. And you can take action there. If you sign our campaign, it will go to your congressional representatives. We need a bill that says the same thing for the United Nations, that no United Nations treaty or other agreement will be effective in the United States without the advice and consent of the Senate. And that will definitely throw a wrench into the works.
Well, I always compare this to that game of whack-a-mole. It's like every time you think you've squelched something else, and something else pops up. So here we go again. Absolutely. So I'm glad that you gave us a very specific action to take when it comes to this, because it's just they don't want to give this up. But I think what you said was really explosive, that it does prove how much power. I think sometimes people are like, in the end, the president doesn't have a whole lot of power. But, you reminded us that with executive orders and such, there are things that can be done, and they are going to absolutely try and push through. That doesn't mean that we don't do our part. I mean, because like you said, it is really encouraging that we were able to squelch the WHO treaty. But now here's another thing that we have to address. Our Constitution doesn't just automatically magic wand save us. I mean, what's really scary, Reggie, is seeing that the Biden administration has already ignored the law on so many things, and even ignored the Supreme Court. They've tried time and time again to completely ignore the Supreme Court when it comes to like student loan handouts, and so many other things. So, man, this is getting really, really scary. And I mean, this is something we absolutely have to get involved on, right?
Right. So, I mean, like the Bible says, in the end times, lawlessness will abound. And these people are lawless. They don't care what the law is. They will do whatever they think that they can get away with. And unless we resist, they can just get away with it. So, getting back to the Pact for the Future and what the end game is, in the last draft, and I have no doubt it's in the final product, they talk about misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech. And so this is a recipe for censorship. Okay, and it is consistent with what was going on, or what is going on with the World Health Organization, the International Health Regulation Amendments, which has this, number one, talks about addressing misinformation and disinformation, and number two, has a section in it about mandatory identification for health purposes. And these identifications can either be paper or digital. And I think that they did that as a concession to some countries just don't have the ability to have digital IDs. But a country like ours and all the developed world will have it. So these are mandatory digital IDs, which they say are important for our health. And of course, they always, totalitarians always say this is for your own good, right? They want to be able to track your vaccination status, which is problematic enough. I mean, that's a way to have forced vaccinations, and it'll be right there on your ID. And if you're not vaccinated, you're not going to be able to go into the store or do whatever else you need to do. But beyond that, there is a chart on the World Economic Forum website about all the different things that these digital IDs are going to do. So the pretext for them, for the World Health Organization, is to basically track vaccination status. And they are currently working with the European Union to roll out international, interoperable digital IDs, and they're well along the way on this. But if you go to the World Economic Forum website, you will see a chart about these IDs, and you are going to need one in order to access healthcare. But beyond that, you will need it to open a bank account. You'll need it to travel. You'll need it to own a communications device like a cell phone or a computer. You will need it to be on social media. You will need it to access government benefits like Social Security or Medicare, Medicaid. You will need it to vote. So, all of these things. So if you're going to be accessing all of these things through a digital ID, what that means is that they can track you through whatever you do. But let's not forget, you're going to need it to buy or sell. Talking about biblical language, okay? You're going to need it to buy and sell online. And so if you step out of line, it's like the China social credit system. Writ wide, it's like the China social credit system worldwide, where in China, they track everything you do, just like what we're talking about here for this digital ID. And if you are found to be counter narrative, so this is where the misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech come in, then they can do things like the first level of punishment would be you lose your job, which is a pretty hefty punishment. You won't be able to buy or sell, or you won't be able to borrow money, so you won't be able to buy a home or start a business. Your kid won't be able to go to a good school. Then if you keep it up, if you keep being a dissident, counter narrative, maybe you're refusing to be vaccinated, they can cut you off from your credit cards and your bank accounts. And if people think that would never happen in North America, it already did happen to the Canadian truckers and those who donated to them when they were protesting vaccine mandates, and they got their credit cards and bank accounts cut off. That's how they squelched that protest. And then if you keep it up in China, they'll just disappear you. And so we have the technology. In fact, I think a lot of the technology in China is from the United States anyway. But we have the technology to have a system like this, and we need to not give them the mandate. We need to not give them the ability to have these digital IDs. And it's really important for people to understand and to alert their representatives to this, because representatives already know that people don't want a vaccine passport, okay? But they don't understand that the vaccine passport is part of the digital ID, and we need to oppose mandatory digital IDs.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when you were talking, that's all I could think of is mark of the beast. Can't get the mark of the beast. And you talk about being counter to the narrative and it being shut off. My show is counter narrative. I could no longer exist. But as you said and pointed out, it's not like if these things could happen. They have happened. They have happened to me. Right. They've happened to others. I mean, on the level of me, like I was unable to monetize any longer, so I can't actually make any income for the work that I do. But for other people, it was even worse, where they can't use an Uber, they can't use their banking anymore. I know people specifically that this has already happened to. So a digital ID would just accelerate and cement in this attack on our ability to dissent from our government, essentially. I wanted to make sure that we hit another topic before I have to let you go, because you are the president of the Women's Rights Without Frontiers. Women's rights is front and center with Kamala as the main opponent. She claims to be for women's rights. And so as the president of the Women's Rights Without Frontiers, what do you make of her trying to position herself as the woman that is going to stand up for women's rights?
Oh my goodness. I have not really followed her that closely in that regard, but Women's Rights Without Frontiers, it has to do with forced abortion in China. Okay. And so what we say is that it's a woman's right not to be forcibly aborted by the government, which was what was happening under the one-child policy. And also that women are still pressured into aborting or abandoning baby girls, especially if they're the second or the third daughter. So women's rights in China is almost kind of the opposite of here, where in China it's the right to have your baby and not be forcibly aborted, whereas for Kamala it's the right to abort your child. I just think that that's just very, very sad view of what women's rights are, and I just I don't agree with it. So.
Yeah, and it looks like you have resources to be able to help support what's happening in the extreme in other countries. And then obviously don't vote for Kamala if you care about women's rights. I mean, we didn't even touch upon the way of women to be and the protected spaces and then sports, etc. But there's that issue as well. Is there anything else you wanted to make sure that we know other than the action plan of getting on the website and taking action when it comes to this UN pact?
Well, I mean, you mentioned the mark of the beast, and this digital ID, I don't think it is the actual mark of the beast, but it's a precursor, because the the pretext that they use for going to digital IDs is it's too easy to forge paper, right? So you have to have it digital. Well, you know what? It's really easy to forge things digital as well. So the next thing is, well, we need to have it be in a chip that's in your hand. And that's where we're heading. And there are some countries that actually have instituted this. So the time to resist is now, because once this stuff is instituted, there will be no more resistance. Because if you resist and you say you're counter-narrative, I'm also counter-narrative. I think most of the people who are watching this show are counter-narrative. Once these things are instituted and we are being surveilled for our social media posts, what we watch, the fact that we're even watching this show would be a mark against us, then they'll be able to just silence us through cutting us off from our social media, from our cell phone, from our internet, from being able to buy and sell online. So, and once that happens, there'll be no more dissent. So the time to dissent is now. I mean, we really, really need everybody. I'd ask people to go to antiglobalist.net. That's antiglobalist.net, and sign the manifesto. Okay, that's right there, Anti-Globalist International Manifesto, and that will put you on my email list, and then you will get further updates and also action items where you can resist. And so thank you very much for doing that.
Yes, thank you so much, Reggie. You're always a pleasure with so much information packed in. So thank you so much for all your efforts, and I encourage people to follow your lead, take your direction. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh my gosh. Could things get any more ridiculous? It's racist to demand a voter ID, but these same loonies want us to all have digital IDs to be able to do absolutely anything else, even to eat and drink and live. Are you kidding me? It's so ridiculous. All right. We are going to hear from our sponsors again real quick, and I'll wrap things up on the other side.
Attention patriotic businesses. Do you want to see your sales skyrocket by selling your products or services to like-minded patriots? Well, if